Hey, hey, and welcome back to Miss Kitty's Wild West Adventures. Today, in honor of Valentine's Day weekend, we're counting down our picks for the top 10 most romantic Wild West couples. For this list, we'll be looking at both fact and fiction. If we missed any of your favorites, be sure to let us know in the comments.
At number 10, Rose Dunn and George Newcomb. George was originally part of the infamous Dalton gang. However, Bob Dalton himself called George too reckless, so George, Bill Doolin, and Charlie Pierce formed their own gang called the Wild Bunch, which was later known as the Doolin-Dalton Gang. Also part of this gang were the Dunn brothers, who had a younger sister named Rose. She would often travel with the gang as a gopher, as she could easily go into town and blend in with the crowd. The gang affectionately called her the Rose of the Cimarron. Soon, Rose found herself head over heels in love with George, who was 12 years her senior. The two began a tumultuous relationship. The Dunn brothers eventually had a falling out with the Wild Bunch, and they turned to bounty hunting. One of their first bounties was their old pal, George. They knew that George was planning to visit the Dunn ranch to visit young Rose, so they hid in the scrub brush and waited for him. As George and his friend Charlie Pierce dismounted from their horses, the Dunn brothers ambushed the pair and killed them on the spot. The next day, they carted the bodies into town to collect the $5,000 reward. As for Rose, she went on to marry and live a long life, finally succumbing at the age of 76. Number 9, Calamity Jane and Wild Bill Hickok. While much has thought to be known about this famous duo, it turns out that very little of this well-known is true. It has been suggested that the fiery former Army Scout and frontier sharpshooter were once married and even had a daughter together, but biographers have recently refuted this. In fact, all that can be proven at this point is that Calamity Jane and Wild Bill arrived in Deadwood together on the same wagon train in July of 1876. Within a month, on August 2nd, Wild Bill was dead, having been shot while playing poker in a saloon in Deadwood. The hand he had yet to play, aces and eights, has come to be known as the dead man's hand. He was buried in Ingleside Cemetery, but his remains were later moved to Mount Moriah Cemetery. When Calamity Jane died in 1903, she was buried next to Wild Bill. According to some, it was her dying wish. According to those who buried her, however, Wild Bill had absolutely no use for Jane in his life, so they decided to play a posthumous joke on him by laying her next to his side in the next life. Whatever the real story behind this infamous pair might be, their love story will forever be immortalized in American film history.
Yes, there never was a glibber fibber or a cuter shooter than Calamity Jane. She could outstalk, outdraw, outride any man in Deadwood City except Wild Bill Hickok.
Only with you killing off them redskins so fast, I was wondering why the government even bothered to send the army.
You calling me a liar again?
At number 8, Miss Kitty and Marshal Dillon. For 20 years, from 1955 to 1975, TV audiences tuned into Gunsmoke every week to watch the exploits of Marshal Matt Dillon defeat the lawless of Dodge City. By his side in many of the show's 635 episodes was a gal whose fiery personality was matched only by her red hair, Miss Kitty Russell. As part owner of the Long Branch Saloon, Miss Kitty often associated professionally with the sort of clientele Marshal Dillon sought out to rid from Dodge City. Throughout the series' long run, viewers watched anxiously for Miss Kitty and Marshal Dillon to take their friendship to the next level. It was this romantic tension, Dillon actor James Arness stated, that kept viewers invested for 20 seasons. Alas, Miss Kitty and Marshal Dillon may only have consummated their relationship in the viewers' imaginations, but they are still a Wild West couple immortalized in song and screen.
So come on, Marshal, and give Miss Kitty a kiss. She's been waiting 30 years for this. So you know her love is true. What the heck is wrong with
Be sure to stay tuned to the end for a special treat from Miss Kitty.
At number 7, Doc Holliday and Big Nose Kate. This chaotic pairing makes Rose Dunn and George Newcomb look like a match made in heaven. Doc and Kate allegedly met in Fort Griffin, Texas. Doc, the tubercular dentist turned gambler, and Kate, an on-again, off-again soiled dove, were matched in both their intelligence and fiery tempers. After he was jailed for killing Ed Bailey, Kate helped him escape to avoid an angry vigilante mob. Eventually, Doc settled in Tombstone, and Kate in Globe, but she would often come down to visit him. Their visits usually ended with one or both of them drunk and abusive toward the other. March of 1881, however, was the last straw as Kate, in a drunken stupor, named Doc as the triggerman in a stagecoach robbery and murder. Although she later recanted her story, the two parted ways shortly after the famous gunfight in October of that year. It wasn't until the following year that Kate and Doc reunited yet again, when he found himself in Glenwood Springs at the home of Kate's brother. The two remained on-again, off-again until Doc's death from tuberculosis in 1887. As for Kate, she went on to marry several times and finally died in 1940 in Prescott, Arizona.
Touch that gun, I'll burn you down.
I calculate that's the end of this town.
I had a boy at the hotel pack us up. The horse is outside.
So that's why you're not wearing a bustle.
Number 6, Wyatt Earp and Josephine Sarah Marcus. Wyatt and Josie met in Tombstone. He was living there with his common-law wife, Mattie. Josie was living there with her fiancé, Sheriff Johnny Bean. Mattie's love for laudanum was matched only by Johnny's love for other women, and before they knew it, Wyatt and Josie found themselves a much better match with each other than with their respective partners. The two began a not-so-secret affair, which abruptly ended in 1881 when tensions in Tombstone heated up. Fearing for her safety, Wyatt sent Josie to live with her parents in California. The two reunited in San Francisco in the fall of 1882 and remained together for the next 46 years, traveling the West in a quest for riches. Their adventures took them to Nevada, Alaska, California, and even back to Arizona, though not to Tombstone. They were still together in January of 1929 when Wyatt died in Los Angeles, and Josie lived for another 15 years. Their remains are buried beside each other at the Hills of Eternity Memorial Park in Colma, California.
I promise I'll love you the rest of your life.
If you're enjoying this video, now would be a good time to show that like button some love. Number 5, Carlotta Tompkins and Frank Thurmond. Carlotta was born in 1844 in Kentucky. Her father, an avid gambler, taught her how to play poker, but then sent her off to a convent for school. After her father died, Carlotta took to the tables to support her mother and younger siblings. Like her father before her, she found that she had a knack for the game. People soon started calling her Lotta Dinero. This was later shortened to Lottie Dino. She earned so much money at poker that she invested in a saloon and brothel in Fort Griffin, Texas. Often referred to as the red-haired queen with the heart of gold, Lottie was the real-life inspiration for Miss Kitty Russell of Gunsmoke. In 1880, Lottie married fellow poker player Frank Thurmond, whom she had met some 15 years earlier. Together, the two retired from the gambling life. He became the vice president of Deming National Bank, and she helped to found St. Luke's Episcopal Church. Frank died in 1908 and Lottie in 1934. They are buried next to each other at Mountain View Cemetery in Deming, New Mexico. At number 4, Johnny Cash and June Carter Cash. June was born and raised in a musical family. In the 40s, June, her mother, and two sisters formed the act Mother Maybelle and the Carter Sisters. Together they toured the country, playing for fans, and eventually joined the cast of the Grand Ole Opry. It was there that June met her first husband, Carl Smith. Johnny Cash was born in Arkansas, and after a stint in the U.S. Air Force, he married Vivian Liberto and moved to Memphis, where he met Sam Phillips of Sun Records fame. In no time, his musical career took off. It wasn't long before he was welcomed to the Grand Ole Opry stage by none other than Carl Smith. But it was the backstage introduction to Carl's wife that would make the greatest impression on Johnny. The two instantly hit it off, each having been a fan of the other, and by the early 60s began touring together. Despite the fact that they were both married to other people, their love for each other blossomed despite their best intentions. June once commented that it was not a convenient time to fall in love with each other, but that her feelings for him were like a ring of fire. It was that feeling that inspired Johnny's hit song that was written by June. It wasn't until 1967 that both found themselves newly divorced. In February of the following year, Johnny proposed in front of a crowd of 7,000 at the London Ice House. They married a few weeks later. Johnny credited June with guiding him to sobriety, and the two remained faithful companions for the rest of their lives. June died in May of 2003, and Johnny just 4 months later in September.
Sorry for the interruption, folks, but I gotta ask June here a question before we finish this song.
What's that, John?
Will you marry me?
At number 3, Roy Rogers and Dale Evans. Dale Evans was born Frances Octavia Smith. At the young age of 14, she married and soon gave birth to a son. By the ripe old age of 17, she found herself a single mom after her husband abandoned her. She began pursuing a singing career in Memphis, while promoters marketed her as the sole support for her younger brother, who was actually her son. As her career began taking off, she took the stage name Dale Evans. Eventually, her singing career turned into an acting career when she was cast opposite John Wayne in Old Oklahoma. The following year, she was cast opposite Roy Rogers. Roy Rogers was born Leonard Franklin Sly. During the Great Depression, hardship brought the Sly family west to California, where he took a job picking peaches for Del Monte. On a whim, he auditioned for a radio show in Inglewood, California, and ended up joining a traveling musical group called the Rocky Mountaineers. This ultimately led him to Hollywood, and in 1938 he changed his name to Roy Rogers, the last name a nod to Western comic entertainer Will Rogers. In 1944 he was cast in The Cowboy and the Senorita, opposite Dale Evans. While he was married at the time, the two hit it off and became close friends. Sadly, in late 1946, Roy's wife died due to complications from childbirth. And on New Year's Eve of 1947, Roy Rogers and Dale Evans married. It was the start of a 51-year marriage between the King of the Cowboys and the Queen of the West. They were together until Roy's death in 1998. Dale followed soon after in 2001. At number 2, Ad and Elizabeth TOEPPERWEIN. Elizabeth Servati was born in New Haven, Connecticut. In 1902, she started working at the Winchester Rifle Factory, where she met Adolf TOEPPERWEIN, a sales representative and exhibition shooter. Adolf had started shooting when he was 6, and by the age of 10, he was out shooting many adults. The year after they met, they were married, and Elizabeth soon gave birth to their only child. Around that time, Elizabeth admitted to Ad that she had never shot a gun, so he started giving her lessons, and he found that she was a natural. It was at this time that she acquired her nickname. After she shot a tin can, she ecstatically exclaimed, "Ad, I plinked it!" and hence her nickname Plinky was born. Before long, she joined his act, shooting 1-inch pieces of chalk from between his fingers and empty shells off his fingertips. Their performance career lasted over 40 years, with such feats as shooting while standing on their heads and lying on their backs. They could break 2 targets simultaneously, one in front and one in back, with the aid of a mirror. Some of Plinky's aerial targets included marbles, apples, oranges, and even eggs. She was the first woman in the United States to qualify as a national marksman with a military rifle. Annie Oakley herself once said to Plinky, "Mrs. Top, you're the greatest shot I've ever seen." Plinky died in 1945, and Ad lived on until 1962. They are buried beside each other in Mission Burial Park in San Antonio, Texas.
This Colt .38 caliber revolver was once owned and used by Ad TOEPPERWEIN. It was just one half of the Winchester ammunition shooting sensation known as Ad and Plinky TOEPPERWEIN, a husband and wife team that toured the country the first half of the 20th century, putting on remarkable feats of shooting skill for the general public.
Before we tell you our number 1 pick, here are some honorable mentions.
Jeremiah Fryer and Pauline Cushman. Pearl Hart and Joe Boot. Laura Bullion and Ben Kilpatrick. Belle and Sam Starr. Coyote and Roadrunner. And at number 1, Annie Oakley and Frank Butler. Annie was born Phoebe Ann Moses in 1860. Unlike her sisters who preferred to play with dolls, Annie preferred engaging in traditionally male hobbies, including, notably, hunting with her father. At the age of 8, she shot an unsuspecting squirrel that had dared come onto her yard, hitting it square in the head, preserving the meat. She would later sell the game she hunted to local hotels, and she was able to pay off her parents' mortgage through the proceeds. One day, one of the hotel keepers with whom she did business hosted a shooting contest between local shooters and a traveling professional sharpshooter named Frank Butler. Frank was born in Ireland and had immigrated to the U.S. when he was 13. Among the many jobs he took, Frank cleaned stables, tried glassblowing, and managed an on-stage dog show before cultivating his shooting skills enough to go on tour as a sharpshooter. In November 1875, as he stood waiting on his opponent, he could scarcely guess that the 15-year-old girl who stood before him would not only outshoot him, but also become the love of his life. Indeed, out of 25 shots, Frank made 24 of them. Annie, however, made all 25. The two were married on August 23, 1876, and began touring together. Frank wrote a poem for Annie. Her presence would remind you of an angel in the skies, and you bet I love this little girl with the raindrops in her eyes. They remained together for 50 years. She died on November 2nd, 1926, and he just 19 days later.
Hello, Bill.
Why, yes, little lady.
I'm Annie Oakley.
Why, Miss Oakley, I am honored.
You are?
Frank, your opponent is ready. Howdy. I told you I'd see you here.
You didn't tell me you was a big swollen-headed stiff.
Do you agree with our list? Let us know in the comments. Mwah! Happy Valentine's Day from Miss Kitty of the Wild West Adventures. Catch you on down the trail.